Alright, so because I've been watching the Star Wars universe and trying to get back into the Star Wars universe, I decided to come up with a few theories of my own throughout watching some of the Star Wars media. And one of the first theories I feel is very important to kind of have to lay the groundwork for more theories is the idea behind what does the Midichlorian cells actually mean. Now, if you don't know, Midichlorian cells basically are given to every single force wielder, or every single being, I guess, in the universe, and having a Midichlorian count of 7,000 or more basically makes you eligible to be a Jedi, and the average count for a Jedi is in fact 10,000. Same thing for a Sith, I'd imagine, but that's pretty much the general consensus. Over 7,000, you are a Jedi. Now, this goes up all the way to 25 slash 27,000 if you look at someone like the Skywalkers. However, for this particular theory, there's a few caveats I have, and some of them are being excluded from this theory. The main ones being excluded from the theory are pretty much any characters or films that have been directed by Disney after they've acquired Lucasfilm. The reason being is that most of them don't follow a congruent line amongst any of the shows at all. Rey Skywalker series being the main example. Even in Rogue One, I think, that old dude being able to just sense everything through the Force, but him never really being a Jedi, is also another indicator they don't really know what a Jedi is. I did quite enjoy Rogue One, but I feel like it's almost invalid in terms of this theory because he would be literally the one outlier that I see. Also, I think there are many shows like Obi-Wan and like Ahsoka that kind of don't really go with the theory either, and that's only because number one, I haven't watched them fully, and number two, I again think they just don't follow a line. None of the movies or shows being made anymore from Star Wars seem to follow a direct line. I think we saw the last of that in the Clone Wars, unfortunately, and after that, it's all just been downhill. Now, my theory basically persists throughout the Star Wars universe from the beginning of the Old Republic all the way till the end of the sixth film, excluding movies like Rogue One and excluding, I believe, Andor, which takes place before Rogue One, which would take place after the third episode, that sort of event timeline. So, pretty much anything made by George Lucas is where this theory comes in, or originally made it from George Lucas, because I do know season 7, I believe, was directed after George Lucas sold Lucasfilm, but that's the general consensus. The other outliers are going to be any of the Skywalkers, and the reason being is because Anakin Skywalker was made through the Force, and if you don't know, Anakin Skywalker, when he was technically made through the Force via Palpatine and Plagueis, I believe explained through the Plagueis book and Palpatine, I believe a Palpatine comic, I could be wrong there, but I believe the Palpatine slash Plagueis book specifically tackled the idea of making a being through the Force that they would eventually be able to control and use for their Sith needs, to basically be able to control an ultra-powerful Force being and have it serve the Empire slash Sith, whatever you want to call it. This didn't end up happening because the Force basically said that's not allowed and illegal. So to combat where all that Force energy was being drawn from, they basically made Shni accidentally pregnant through the Force, and that's why Shni technically doesn't have a father. So Palpatine has no genetic relation to Luke Skywalker, Anakin Skywalker, any of the Skywalkers. The Skywalkers are quite literally made through the Force. That's why they're not included, I believe, because they're Force beings. There's sort of the exception to this rule. I believe a Force being is, in some ways, similar to the actual Force beings we see in the Clone Wars film, which I do believe is the congruent narrative amongst the Force, where light and dark are basically constantly fighting, but they are technically beings in the universe. Sometimes they get out of balance, and the dark one's a little controlling too much of the time. Sometimes the light one is just overpowering, and the dark one's nowhere to be seen. That's kind of how I view the light and dark throughout the universe of Star Wars. And I believe Anakin kind of falls under that family rather than any other biological family. So that's why I think his Midichlorian count doesn't really matter in terms of my theory, because I'm excluding him from being eligible to being this line of my theory. Also, the other one would be General Grievous. Now, if you don't know, General Grievous' Midichlorian count is above the level required for a Jedi, which is 7,000, but General Grievous was fused with Sifo Dyas's blood. Sifo Dyas is a Jedi who worked alongside Dooku, who eventually was killed, and Sifo Dyas's blood was used to mix into General Grievous to ultimately try to make an amalgamated droid that would be able to use the Force. Now, it failed, and General Grievous is actually not Force sensitive, although there are some comics that suggest that he may be Force sensitive. He's never once used the Force in any sort of media, specifically the showing media, like movies and stuff like that. Now, there might be some comic out there that has him using the Force, but I'm assuming Disney, like with everything, Disney has probably made it not canon that he can use the Force, or whatever comic that he's shown to use the Force. You kind of get my point. These two individuals, specifically Anakin's and any of Anakin's bloodline, along with General Grievous, are excluded from my theory. I believe they are amalgamations and Force beings, so they are just different beings than what most alien species are in the universe. Now, with all that being said, we can get into my theory. So, what is my official theory? Well, I believe that M count refers to the potential Force ability of an individual. This does not mean that from the get-go when you're born, if you have something like 12,000 Midichlorian count, you're able to use all 12,000. This means that your cap is 12,000, 12,500, whatever. In the case of Palpatine, for example, his Midichlorian count is pretty much theorized to be 20,000, or I think it's written in the comics that it's actually 20,000, and my theory basically suggests that Palpatine is able to use all 20,000 through training, ability, whatever, but that is his maximum, and that is why he ultimately gets defeated, is mainly because the beings that beat him are the ones in the higher Midichlorian counts. But it gets a little rocky because those are the Skywalkers. I'm not including them in this theory. However, this does also have backbone, because Palpatine is effectively never defeated in the entirety of the Clone Wars, nor is he really defeated in the trilogy movies. Now, I do know Mace Windu beats him in a one-on-one. However, I think he purposely loses. I think Palpatine purposely loses the fight, only because he needed Anakin at the time to sway his emotion, and that's why Palpatine kind of lost that fight on purpose, making him look weak and vulnerable, and that he needed assistance. Outside of that, Palpatine is pretty much flawless amongst the Clone Wars and amongst the other movies he's in. Pretty much never loses a fight, and he's always one step ahead, and I believe that's because he's really utilizing the maximum of his Midichlorian count. Now, why is his Midichlorian count such a big factor in terms of his Force abilities? Well, I do think that the other Jedi stood no match, because regardless of anything, Palpatine's Midichlorian count at 20,000 allowed him to effectively destroy any competition that was below him. That's why I think his Force Lightning was so powerful in the movies specifically, and the Clone Wars especially, where he's able to effectively just use Force Lightning and Control-Alt-Delete anyone in front of him. He does it towards Darth Maul, and he does it towards a few Jedi. Now, the only case this doesn't happen is when he fights someone like Master Yoda. And the reason why I believe there's basically a cap, and why 20,000 is Palpatine's cap, is because someone like Yoda runs along, and he has a lower count than Palpatine, but he's able to basically push back on the Force Lightning for moments. Then, eventually he gets overpowered by Palpatine's Force Lightning, which I think proves that Palpatine is either at his max or close to his max during the height of the First Galactic Republic. That, I believe, is when Palpatine's at his strongest, and he's reached his peak. There's no more left to really gain. There's no more power he can really improve on, other than just learning more about the Force. Now, Yoda being able to momentarily stop the Force Lightning, I think, makes sense, because he's just slightly below, which would suggest that he's able to hold off longer than other Jedi. And when he does eventually fail, he's able to get back up and not be, I guess, gravely wounded or, mortally wounded. But you can even see Palpatine doesn't mortally wound himself by hitting himself, reflected by the lightsaber's Force Lightning. So I say all this to basically say Yoda's midichlorian count being slightly lower than Palpatine's is supported by my theory, just because, my theory is supported by Yoda having slightly lower midichlorian than Sidious, a maximum of a 2,000 difference. Theorized that it could be anywhere from 18,000 to 19,900 sort of thing, where Palpatine is at that 20,000. So Yoda being slightly behind, I think supports my theory that the M count refers to basically a potential in the Force. Now, if you want me to be a little bit more exact, I kind of refer to the midichlorian count to be comparable to a mana bar. Now, if you don't know what a mana bar is, I'm referring to RPG logic, MMO logic type of stuff, where if you play most role-playing games that have a fantasy aspect to it, you'll most likely see a mana bar to the characters, and I believe the midichlorian count basically refers to the mana bar. So, if a Jedi, for example, has 10,000 midichlorian cells, I believe that's him having a mana bar that has a potential of 10,000, basically, mana to store. That allows them to use the similar spells of all the other Jedis. However, you're just not able to make that spell significantly stronger than other people. A good example would be in a hypothetical where Yoda shoots a fireball from his hand that uses all of his midichlorian cells, and Palpatine decides to do the same thing using all of his midichlorian cells, effectively draining them, so they're not able to use another Force ability afterwards. So that's kind of how I see the midichlorian count. I do believe it is on par with a mana bar. If you want to say that mana bar is 20,000 to make it easier, and if you want to say Yoda's mana bar is only, 19,000 or 18,000, then I think that's an easier way to understand it, a little easier to digest. Now, moving into the thick of it, I believe my theory that midichlorian cells just refers to a mana bar also is supported by the fact that Jedi seem to also be able to learn many Force abilities throughout the Force, while not being the same levels as the highest in power. The highest in power I would refer to as Emperor Palpatine or Master Yoda. Master Yoda is typically seen as the backbone, as the Jedi Council, even if Mace Windu's in that hot seat, or they have the lead council members. I forget exactly what their name is, but when they have the lead council members, Master Yoda is without a doubt one of the most looked at for advice, opinions, things like that nature when it came to the Jedi Council and the Clone Wars, and the movies. Now, during the Galactic Republic, obviously you have Emperor Palpatine. Emperor Palpatine, I think, is pretty fairly the most strong leader in the Galactic Empire, so everyone pretty much reports to him. That sort of situation. Now, when I'm referring to these two high in power beings, there are lower midichlorian count Force wielders that are able to use similar abilities. With Emperor Palpatine being able to use Force Lightning, Count Dooku is also able to use Force Lightning, even though Count Dooku has a significantly lower midichlorian count. Believed slightly lower than Yoda's, or significantly lower, depending. Yoda's midichlorian count is, pretty much without a doubt higher than Dooku's. And Yoda is also able to repel Dooku's lightning in the prequel trilogy. So I think that also supports the theory that Yoda's midichlorian count basically attributes to why he's able to repel all these spells. His mana count is effectively allowing him to absorb that mana, and because it's not capping his mana bar out, he's able to just absorb it, if that makes sense. So basically, to sort of simplify it, if a Sith user who has 15,000 midichlorian cells, uses his strongest and longest amount of force lightning. Yoda, who has 18,000, let's say for hypothetical, midichlorian cells, is able to repel it 100 out of 100 times because Yoda is just able to absorb it, similar to the fireball analogy. Now, I do want to get into the other characters in the franchise who share force abilities. Now, I am aware that every Jedi, technically in lore, all has unique abilities. There are cases like Darth Nihilus. There are cases like Starkiller, like a Anakin. Characters like that, even though they're not fully in this theory, I'm kind of just using them to say, like, Jedi all have, like, a special ability. But Jedi and Sith all have a special ability. You can kind of think of it like a clerk from My Hero Academia if you're used to anime, but if you want to think about it, it's like spawning into an MMORPG, and when you spawn in, you're just given a random skill. Maybe that skill is to be able to teleport 8 meters or something. Similar things to that nature in terms of the Force. These, I believe, are exceptions to the rule of this theory. Not in terms of they don't count, but I think any Jedi who has a specific unique ability towards them, they're always able to use, even if it costs them the maximum amount of midichlorian cells required. Now, I think a good example is Darth Nihilus. Darth Nihilus is able to annihilate what was rumored to be 100 Jedi just with his ability, Force Life Drain, which was able to just massacre Jedi. Now, because it is a unique ability to him, and no one else can really learn that ability, I believe that's kind of why Darth Nihilus was able to kill 100 Jedi. It's because it's just a unique ability that he has that doesn't require more than the midichlorian cells given. Now, something like a Force Ghost, I believe every Jedi can learn, / Sith can learn, through the art of training. Again, the exception to the rule being Anakin. We can look at someone like Obi-Wan Kenobi, who is expected to have a 12,500 midichlorian count, which is significantly lower than Master Yoda, yet both of them are able to become Force Ghosts in roughly the same amount of time. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, after the events of Episode 3, and before the Episode of 4, Obi-Wan and Master Yoda were both basically sent on their own missions, but Master Yoda was sent to a planet to hide away from the Empire, and while he was doing that, it's a pretty fair assumption that he could have been using it to get more in tune with the Force, hence why he's able to become a Force Ghost near the end of it. Now, Obi-Wan Kenobi is also able to become a Force Ghost, and I believe that's through the teachings of Qui-Gon Jinn. Now, whether Qui-Gon Jinn accelerated this process, or whether Master Yoda having a higher midichlorian count meant he learned faster than Obi-Wan Kenobi, I personally don't think really matters. I don't think midichlorian count necessarily represents the speed at which a Jedi / Sith is able to learn Force abilities. I think it's just the amount of midichlorian cells they can pretty much use. Or sorry, the amount of mana they can pretty much use. You know, the amount of Force they can pretty much, like, put into their abilities. Now, because Obi-Wan is at that 12,500 mark, maybe that's the cap out for Ghosts, but having the median of Jedi being 10,000, or yeah, 10,000, I think this also is an indicator that if not all Jedi can become Force Ghosts, surely anyone above Obi-Wan Kenobi's 12,500 could be if they were taught how to do it. Now, I don't think... I think this makes sense, because if you look back, not all the Jedi become Force Ghosts. It's pretty much just the Key, Yoda, Obi-Wan, and Anakin. But I do think there's that sort of correlation. So I do think something as powerful as becoming a Force Ghost, and being one with the Force, and being able to show up when needed, throughout the balance of the Force, you know. When it's out of balance, I think it's clear that Force Ghosts tend to prop up a little bit more. But I do think that the midichlorian count allows all Jedi to eventually be able to use Force Ghosts, or at least Jedi above Obi-Wan, or at Obi-Wan, so the 12,500. Now, this is probably a little bit bigger list than I was expecting, but that would include people like Plo Koon, and that would include people like Darth Maul, if we're looking at both sides. Now, if we're looking at both sides, both of them, I do think, had the potential to become Force Ghosts, but the reason why they didn't is simply because they weren't training for it, and they didn't bother speccing into it. Sort of like a skill tree, if you will. More RPG terms. But I do think my theory still kind of holds firm with the idea that Midichlorian count is basically just a mana bar that you have to max out. That's also why I think someone like Master Yoda was able to lose to someone like Plo Koon in sparring, because I believe sparring has very little to do with Force, in that everyone technically has the sense of Force, in terms of Jedi. You know, once you become a Jedi, you basically learn the ability to sense your surroundings without being able to see, as we've seen in the films with Luke's training. Stuff like that, I think, is, you know, consistent amongst all Jedi, and that they're all able to learn through teaching. So my theory basically suggests that dueling has very little to do with the actual Midichlorian count, and the Midichlorian count just infers the ability to really put your force into it. I think another good example of my meaning of the mana situation, I think the reason why Palpatine's able to kind of cloak himself from other Jedi so well is because his cloaking of darkness pretty much comes from the ability to have more Midichlorian cells than everyone else around him. So because he's the highest Midichlorian count around, he's able to cloak himself. Now, Darth Plagueis had a large amount, but he wasn't... he was able to cloak himself well throughout the times, even, you know, during times where they were hunting Sith and everything. Even though Darth Plagueis does have a lower Midichlorian count, I believe that's probably why he seeked out someone like Palpatine, because Palpatine's Midichlorian count also would allow them to basically stay hidden for longer. So I do think, once again, the ability to cloak yourself is something any Sith can do. It's just the more Midichlorian cells you have, the longer you can do it, or the more powerful the cloak is. That's kind of where I'm leaning towards. So I think it's important to distinct that every Jedi can technically learn pretty much any Force ability, except for the unique ones. But I also think any Sith can learn any Sith ability, except for the unique ones. And having a higher Midichlorian count just means you can make that ability stronger. So pretty much the average Jedi can use, in an example for RPGs, the average Jedi can use a fireball. But Yoda's fireball will be stronger than every single average Jedi, guaranteed 100% of the time. That's kind of how my theory is coming along. Now, I do believe dueling has very little to do with the Force. In terms of, it does have something to do with the Force, and I don't know, it's explained in the films and in the shows, that it's very important to learn how to use the Force in dueling, especially because the whole idea is that you're sensing your surroundings, you're not necessarily going based off what's in front of you, you're more or less trying to go through instinct. However, I do think that it's just one of those, it's like the first skill you get in an MMORPG. It's like something everyone can do all the time. However, something like a Force Lightning exerts a lot of effort and a lot of energy and is unable to sustain for a long period of time. So I kind of think that my theory would also suggest why a lot of the times you don't see just a stronger Jedi walk up to a weaker Sith and be able to just toss them around like a piñata. Number one, I do think I believe it's explained there's some sort of Force aura that goes around the Jedis and everything. But instead of that, I would just say that you can't really move someone with the Force unless their guard is down or your Midichlorian is just higher. Now, I would use the example given in the Clone Wars Season 7 to support my theory. Now, in this season, we get to see Darth Maul versus Ahsoka. Ahsoka actually does have a higher Midichlorian count in the 16,000s, and Darth Maul has a mere 12,500. However, Ahsoka's never really able to use a Force push, a Force pull, any sort of Force ability until Darth Maul gets to the point in the fight where he's basically concluded that he's going to commit Control-Alt-Delete. Now, in the process of him doing that, he lets his guard down, naturally, because he assumes the end is coming, and Ahsoka is then able to freely pick up Maul, even if it is only for a brief amount of time, and Maul's not able to resist it. Now, I think in a situation like that, if Maul's midichlorian count was higher, I think there would be a situation where he'd be able to overpower the Force being used on him to at least break that Force connection, that telekinesis that's pretty much going on, and fall to his doom. That's kind of where I think the midichlorian count matters, and why we see certain events happen a certain way. Now, moving on from that, I hope it also makes sense that I'm not including General Grievous or Anakin Skywalker or the Anakin Skywalker bloodline, because a lot of the times it's very hard to look under a microscope with them, because they are the Skywalker bloodline, is what I'm referring to. They are anomalies. They are off the beaten path. While they might share DNA with Padme Amidala, they are definitely just different because of that Anakin bloodline in them. That's why I think their midichlorian count is so high. And while their potential might work with this theory, I think it kind of breaks the idea of the being able to have that sort of power, or have that sort of ability to be stronger than someone like Emperor Palpatine. Because I do believe Emperor Palpatine should be like the strongest being in the Force, and that makes him that much more menacing, naturally made through the Force, and that's why he's able to accomplish so much. But the Chosen Ones, being Anakin and Luke, even though I know George Lucas has stated that Anakin's the original Chosen One, Luke has a big hand in how the Chosen One ends up, you know, turning back to the light side. There's an argument to be made for both. But they are anomalies, and I think because of their existence, it kind of upsets the whole balance of the, you know, Palpatine is this menacing guy who comes along, he's manipulated everyone, he's trained for the later portion of his life, and he's able to, you know, control a whole empire under his rule, and then a boy comes along and converts Vader, and, you know, Vader ends up just throwing Palpatine down a shaft. But I do think that my theory is still supported by all these encounters I've suggested, like the Darth Maul Ahsoka, like the Yoda being able to fend off someone like Dooku's lightning, but not being able to fend off Palpatine's lightning, stuff like that. So I do think my theory holds in terms of everything if we don't include the Skywalkers. Also, I don't believe that the midichlorian count has anything to do with how fast one learns through the Force. And the reason why I suggest this is because Yoda's been around for 900 years. Now, it's possible that Yoda reached his max capacity very early on, and that's why he contained such a high role amongst the Council for so long. Or it also suggests why Yoda is never able to really challenge Palpatine after their first encounter, because he's realized he's beaten, and he's not able to ever match that power. So that kind of, you know, if a Jedi basically fights a Sith who has a higher midichlorian count than them, and they lose the fight not just through dueling, but through Force abilities, like Yoda did when he got Force lightninged, I do believe that my theory would hold that that person would just never be able to beat them. Especially if Palpatine is at max capacity at his 20k. So, well, Palpatine is only around for 88 years. His death, I believe, he was 88. His later years, he did not seem to grow in strength for the Force power. Now, there is, like, an argument to be made Vader did, and that's why I'm not including Anakin in this whole thing, because Darth Vader's able to Force choke someone from very, very far away. Now, this could be Jedi just need to focus the image and they're able to Force choke. But I believe it's more or less him using the power from, you know, thousands and thousands of light years away or whatever it was. So that's why I'm kind of just excluding Darth Vader, Anakin Skywalker, and them from this whole theory. But with all that being said, I do think that even though Palpatine is much younger in terms of years than Yoda, I think that it doesn't really have anything to do with the midichlorian count on how they mastered it. I just think Palpatine was able to master it much faster due to the teachings of Darth Plagueis, and I believe that Master Yoda capped out very early on, and while he's not able to improve any of his skills as he gets older, he is able to learn more skills through the Force, and that's why I think he's able to become a Force ghost eventually. You know, if the events transpired where Yoda ended up dying during the fall of Order 66, I don't believe that Yoda would have became a Force ghost because he would have required teaching. Now, I also think this is why Yoda focuses so much on looking at the future throughout the Clone Wars when he's talking to Anakin, or even when he's talking to Anakin in the Attack of the Clones, I want to say. Um, could be, could have been Empire Strikes Back, or the Revenge of the Sith. I believe it was actually Revenge of the Sith. One of those two movies where Yoda was basically talking to Anakin, saying you shouldn't focus on these, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. I actually think it was Attack of the Clones, now that I'm remembering. But I do think that my theory holds strong that pretty much any Jedi can learn any ability. It's just that level of ability is not going to be anywhere near to someone who has a higher midichlorian count than them. So, in conclusion, I say all this to basically say, midichlorian count pretty much means almost nothing other than your potential ability that you can put into through Force abilities. Now, this still means that a Jedi has to train. This still means a Jedi is required to learn the ways of the Force, how the Force operates, how to control the motions if you're a Jedi, or how to unleash them as the Sith. And I think it is also an argument in favor of dueling matters more when it comes to Jedi versus Sith, or Jedi even versus Jedi. I think it completely matters on the dueling aspect, the experience in the field, everything like that. Less about the midichlorian count. Midichlorian count is just there to basically say, hey, this Jedi or this Sith is only able to get X strong. The reason, another kind of theory, reason why I have this theory, is because Palpatine, I believe, is set to be the strongest being in the Star Wars universe in terms of midichlorian count naturally made. All the Skywalkers are slightly higher than him, but I don't consider them to be along this theory. They are Force beings, they are outside of this theory range. And again, General Grievous, he's more or less an amalgamation of the Force. He's not, or not of the Force, but he's an amalgamation of people who could wield the Force. It doesn't necessarily mean he is part of the Force. So I think it kind of detaches him from that. They're all part of the Force, but General Grievous himself doesn't have the connection that he's supposed to have given his genetics. That's kind of what I'm alluding to. So regardless of whatever his count is, it still doesn't mean he's able to wield the Force. So that's kind of what I'm alluding to. But yeah, that's kind of my whole theory with midichlorian count. I wanted to really set the groundwork for what the midichlorian count truly means, because I do think it matters to some sort of extent. Even though I know most people meme on it, I think it's fairly important to discuss the importance of midichlorian cells and how well they fit into the universe. Under the theory that I've suggested, that it's kind of just a mana bar, I think this kind of makes it very possible for future fights and future series to pop off very well, you know? Because I think I think any series where the main character just instantly knows how to use the Force has gone very poorly wrong. Hence why I don't include the Rey Skywalker trilogy. Her being able to just be able to fucking summon lightning through her hands by accidentally accessing the Force, I think completely breaks any theory of what midichlorian means. And honestly, if we didn't have all these Disney garbage films of how the Force is working, I think this theory holds pretty solidly. Now, I am very welcome to anyone who wants to sort of counter this theory with any sort of, oh, well, in this fight, it wouldn't have worked here. I'm welcome to that in the comments, and I'm welcome to seeing it. This is kind of just me trying to lay the groundwork for future theories I have planned, There's a lot of characters in Star Wars I really care about in terms of story. I think they're some of the best written characters of all time in all media I've ever seen. I've played a lot of video games, I've seen a lot of sci-fi, and if we're talking in terms of sci-fi, I do think Star Wars is on another level when it came to old Lucasfilm. Unfortunately, it's not the case anymore, so I kind of just wanted to get my thoughts and opinions on the older state of Star Wars, and not really a theory on the current, how the Force works. Because as far as I'm concerned, I don't consider any of the current Rey Skywalker movies, or any of the Disney-made shows to really be under the guidelines of the Star Wars universe. I just kind of treat them as their own thing, and I think best case scenario, every single episode, in their final episodes, for their final seasons, would just have the characters in those episodes waking up from a bad dream. You know, Obi-Wan just waking up and being like, what a terrible nightmare that was, from the Obi-Wan show. Or Rey waking up on a desert planet being like, damn, that was a crazy dream I had, you know. That's, I think, best case scenario for the Star Wars universe. I think they're leaning outside of the direction of coherency, and I think this theory kind of promotes coherency. So that's kind of why I wanted to make it. Just a little bit of discussion, a little bit of groundwork. Again, I'm open to any sort of refuting of my theories, you know, and maybe I'll make an update when I counter the theory, you know, or counter the countering of my theories. So that's kind of where I sit. You know, just wanted to get something out there as far as theories, start this theory series. But yeah, with all that being said, I want to thank you for making it to the end of this video, making it all the way to the end. And as always, I hope you have a great day.